ABC General Hospital spoilers for Wednesday. February 25 reveal that Cody had never expected a single book to redraw the borders of his entire identity. Yet as he closed Molly's manuscript for the final time, he felt the ground beneath him shift in a way both terrifying and liberating. For so long he had lived with the quiet conviction that he was the complication in everyone else's story, the disruption, the misstep, the man who arrived too late or acted too impulsively. But Molly had written him differently. In her pages he saw a version of himself he had never dared imagine, a man who fought for the people he loved, who walked through fire even when the world refused to see the burns, who chose loyalty over survival again and again. And as he stood there with the book still warm in his hands, he realized that for the first time in years, someone had given him permission to stop apologizing for existing. Someone had seen him clearly. Someone had seen his heart. And that someone was Molly. When he found her sitting alone, shoulders tense and breath shallow, it struck him how often she carried her storms in silence. She had always been the strong one, the one who solved problems with rational precision, the one who believed in structure when the world spun too fast. Yet beneath that quiet discipline was a woman who feared falling short, who feared wanting too much, who feared the consequences of letting her guard drop long enough for someone to truly love her. Cody approached gently, his voice low and steady, letting the emotional weight of the book settle between them. He told her she was brilliant, not because of the world she created on the page, but because she had captured truth with a kind of courage she never gave herself credit for. And when he said he recognized himself, the real him, not the flawed version, he had learned to expect something inside Molly cracked open, soft and trembling. Her doubts had been gnawing at her for weeks. She worried the manuscript exposed too much, that readers would see it as romantic fantasy rather than a confession she wasn't brave enough to speak aloud. She feared Cody would resent being portrayed as a hero when he spent so much of his life convinced he wasn't one. But instead of pulling away, he stepped closer, telling her that her story had made him understand something he never could have without her words. He wasn't defined by past mistakes or the shadows he once walked through. He was shaped by the choices he made, now by the loyalty he offered, the compassion he carried, the instinct to protect rather than destroy. And suddenly Molly felt seen in a way that left her breathless, as if he had reached inside her fear and pulled her back into the light. Their connection, once tentative and unspoken, began to thrum with a deeper urgency. It wasn't the fiery rush of infatuation, but something far more dangerous, an emotional shift that demanded honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to let another person touch the parts of themselves they kept hidden. Cody had always admired Molly's mind, but now he admired her bravery, the courage it took to write what she could not say aloud. Molly in turn felt a new steadiness in him, a grounded certainty that came from finally understanding his own worth. The tension between them grew electric, not chaotic but purposeful, as if the universe had been waiting for both of them to catch up to what was already unfolding. As Cody confessed how deeply the book had affected him, Molly felt the walls she built around her heart begin to dissolve. He wasn't soothing her with empty praise. He was speaking from a place of revelation, telling her that her words had rewritten the narrative of his own life. And knowing that she had changed him, truly changed him, ignited something powerful inside her. Their emotional worlds, once parallel lines, finally collided in a way neither could ignore. By the time Cody pulled her into an embrace, it no longer felt like comfort. It felt like surrender. The moment where two people stopped fighting what has already chosen them. Their romance, once a quiet undercurrent, now surged forward with undeniable force. It brought heat, clarity, and a sense of direction that neither had anticipated but both desperately needed. Cody no longer saw himself as the villain. Molly no longer feared she was unlovable. And together they stepped into a new kind of story, one where the hero and the writer were finally brave enough to choose each other. Britt and Jason stood on the invisible edge of a choice that neither of them had ever expected, to face a place where loyalty, survival, and emotion collided with such force that the air around them felt charged. For weeks, Jason had moved with the silent precision of a man trained to survive anything. But this time the mission was different. This time he wasn't protecting an organization, a territory, or even himself. He was protecting Britt, and that simple truth had shifted the balance inside him in ways he could no longer deny. Every step he took, every lead he followed, every risk he calculated was now anchored to one goal, keeping her alive long enough to escape the chain reaction Sidwell and Cullum had unleashed across Port Charles. And even though Britt tried to mask her fear behind her sharp wit and hardened independence, Jason could see the cracks forming everywhere she tried to hide them. He knew Britt was the target not because of something she had done, but because Sidwell and Cullum saw her as leverage. A piece in the political and personal game they were determined to win. Their madness was escalating, thinning the boundaries between strategy and obsession. Cullum was already spiraling, intoxicated by the idea of punishing Jason through the people he cared for, while Sidwell's thirst for control had become a dark current running through every move he made in Washington. Together they were unpredictable, unstable, and perfectly willing to destroy anyone who threatened their agenda. Jason understood this better than anyone, and that was why the quiet moments between him and Britt had become more fragile, more precious, more dangerous. They were running out of time to choose a path, run, fight, or sacrifice, something neither of them wanted to lose. Britt, despite her fierce exterior, felt the weight of Jason's determination in every breath. She had spent her life trying to outrun her past, trying to rewrite the legacy of her parents, trying to prove she wasn't destined for the darkness that had shaped her childhood. But with Jason, something had softened inside her. He had seen through her armor without demanding that she take it off. He had walked beside her in the shadows without asking her to pretend she wasn't afraid. And now as she watched Jason tense at every unfamiliar sound and track every movement around them, she realized he was preparing himself for the moment when he might have to sacrifice everything, including himself, to protect her. It terrified her more than anything Sidwell or Cullum could orchestrate. Jason, however, wasn't thinking about fear. He was thinking about inevitability. He could feel the city's shifting alliances, tightening truths unraveling. Sidwell's political power was merging with Cullum's violent instability, forming a threat that had no clear center and no obvious weakness. If Jason made one wrong move, Britt would be the one to pay for it. He had been in impossible situations before, but this time there was no emotional distance, no cold calculation. Britt mattered to him in a way that made every decision heavier. She brought humanity into his life, a dangerous vulnerability when men like Cullum were watching. Yet that same vulnerability was giving Jason the clarity he needed. He would not let her die for his mistakes or for Sidwell's ambitions. As the night deepened around them, the tension between them became a quiet storm. They were two people shaped by violence and loss, finally acknowledging that their connection was no accident. They were choosing each other even as the world around them demanded they choose survival instead. Britt could feel the truth in the way Jason positioned himself between her and every threat, in the subtle gentleness of his voice when he told her what their next steps would be, in the way he looked at her as if he had already accepted that saving her was worth any consequence he would have to face. And Jason could feel the truth in Britt's resolve. She was no longer just running, she was fighting for him as fiercely as he was fighting for her. It was messy, frightening, and completely out of their control, but the deeper the danger became, the more undeniable their bond grew. They were no longer standing at a crossroads, they were being pushed toward a single path, one that demanded sacrifice, defiance, and the willingness to confront enemies willing to burn the entire city to ash. Whatever came next, Jason knew one thing: Sidwell and Cullum had miscalculated. They thought fear would fracture him. They thought targeting Britt would weaken him. Instead, they had awakened a version of Jason that did not back down, did not hesitate, and did not lose the people he had decided to protect. And Britt, shaken but unbroken, to realize that this battle was no longer just about survival. It was about rewriting the fate she had always feared. Together they were stepping into a storm powerful enough to alter everything, but for the first time both of them felt ready to fight. Gio had spent weeks suspended between hope and uncertainty, clinging to the faint possibility that life might finally be offering him something bright after months of confusion. So when the message arrived, quiet, unexpected, carrying the unmistakable promise of good news, his heart reacted before his mind could catch up. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that Emma might truly be coming home. He pictured her walking through familiar streets again, breathing the same air he did, smiling in that way that always softened the world around him. But beneath the swell of relief was an uneasiness he couldn't push aside. He knew Emma well enough to understand that nothing about her return would be simple, and the timing of the news felt too sharp, too sudden, carrying the echo of something unresolved. Emma had always been a storm disguised as sunlight, brilliant, determined, compassionate, but carrying the weight of pressures no one her age should have had to navigate. Her life in California had become a maze of expectations and silent burdens, a place where she was forced to grow up too quickly while pretending everything was under control. So the announcement that she was planning to come home wasn't just a milestone, it was a rupture. A decision like that meant something had shifted, something significant, something she hadn't told Gio yet. And even as he let himself imagine their reunion, he felt the shadow behind the joy rising like a warning. The people around Gio could see the conflict brewing inside him. On one hand, he was filled with warmth and almost breathless anticipation that the girl he cared deeply for was finally returning. On the other hand, he carried the instinctive tension of someone who sensed trouble long before it fully emerged. Emma never made impulsive decisions. If she was coming back, it wasn't because she missed Port Charles. It was because something had forced her hand. Gio replayed their last conversations, noticing gaps in her words, pauses where she seemed to weigh the truth against the risk of saying it out loud. She spoke of overwhelming schedules of pressure she couldn't quite define, of people who seemed invested in her staying exactly where she was. Something had been closing in on her long before she ever admitted it. Now as the news of her impending return settled over him, Gio felt the truth tightening around him like an invisible net. Emma was bringing something back with her information, consequences, maybe even danger. Whatever it wasn't small. It wasn't harmless. And it wasn't going away just because she crossed state lines. He knew it the same way he knew the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Emma didn't run from problems. She confronted them. But if she was coming home, it meant she couldn't fight this one alone. The storm clouds gathered quickly. Just as hope began to lift him, whispers of what Emma had uncovered drifted through channels Gio never expected to hear. Rumors of medical cover-ups, unethical research, and a scandal rooted in people powerful enough to bury entire futures. Emma had stumbled into something that should have remained hidden, something capable of ruining reputations and destroying lives. And the moment Gio realized that her return was tied to that secret, the joy inside him twisted into fear. She wasn't just coming home to rest. She was coming home to reveal something or to escape it. Gio's mind raced with possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. He knew how this town worked. Secrets never stayed quiet. They echoed, they spread, they dragged innocent people into their orbit. If Emma was in possession of information capable of shaking institutions or exposing corruption, then he wasn't simply celebrating her return, he was preparing for the fallout of whatever truth she was carrying. And worse, he sensed that people were already watching him, studying his movements, waiting to see if he knew more than he let on. Still beneath the rising fear, Gio felt a fierce protectiveness harden inside him. Emma trusted him. She had always seen him with a clarity no one else could match. If she had chosen to come home, then he would stand between her and whatever threat followed. It didn't matter how messy or dangerous things became, he would not let her face this alone. But as the first wave of trouble began to surface, Gio couldn't shake the certainty that this wasn't just Emma's battle anymore. Her truth could unravel alliances, expose hidden agendas, and ignite a conflict that would pull him directly into the center. What should have been the happiest news of his year was quickly transforming into the beginning of a much larger storm. Emma was coming home. But she was bringing something with her, something explosive enough to turn Gio's life upside down. And even as his hope flickered like a fragile flame, he sensed that the trouble trailing behind her was only just beginning. Dante had never expected his quiet dinners with Liz to evolve into something deeper. Yet there was an ease between them that neither could ignore. But lately, even their growing connection couldn't soften the tension circling around them. Every conversation seemed to drift back to Willow, her sudden shifts in behavior, her desperate attempts to control the narrative around Drew, and the tightening grip Sidwell seemed to hold over her. Liz felt at first a subtle instinct sharpened by years of navigating chaos inside the hospital. Dante felt it next, trained to notice patterns, inconsistencies, and the quiet tremors that signal danger long before it erupts. During their latest date, the unease became impossible to ignore. Liz confessed she had seen Willow arguing with a staff member about access to medication she shouldn't have touched. Dante shared that Willow's timeline in the Drew investigation didn't match the physical evidence. Piece by piece, a picture emerged: Willow acting not like a grieving spouse, but like someone scrambling to hide a mistake that could ruin everything she had fought for. The romantic moment shifted instantly into strategy. Dante's instincts demanded action while Liz's medical knowledge filled in the gaps he couldn't see. Together they realized Willow's behavior wasn't reckless, it was calculated, and whatever she was hiding was big enough to put Wiley, Amelia, and even Drew's name in the crossfire. The danger was no longer hypothetical. It was growing, spreading, pulling every thread in Port Charles tighter. And as Dante reached for Liz's hand across the table, they both understood that their budding relationship was now tied to a storm. Neither of them chose, but both were now responsible for stopping.